Ha-joon had a strict rule about black women. He didn't date them, didn't entertain them, and certainly didn't allow them anywhere near his inner circle. He rationalized it as a necessary boundary to protect his sprawling underworld empire, a prejudice kept as cold and unyielding as the steel he used to rule Seoul's most ruthless syndicate. His family, however, had decided otherwise. Just one dinner, his elder uncle stated that Thursday evening, the older man's voice echoing through the cavernous, dimly lit expanse of Ha-joon's private office. No, Ha-joon didn't even look up from the sprawling shipment manifests on his desk. Millions of dollars in illicit cargo required his absolute, undivided attention. In his world, isolation was survival. His uncle slammed his silver-tipped cane against the mahogany desk, the sharp crack forcing Ha-joon's dark, calculating eyes to finally rise. The old man possessed the same ruthless, terrifying aura that had built their criminal dynasty from the ground up. "We owe her a life debt, Ha-joon," his uncle said, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "In our world, an unpaid debt to a civilian is a glaring sign of weakness. You will host her for dinner, and you will ensure her silence. You have until tomorrow night." Ha-joon's jaw tightened. The VIP dining room of the Hana Club was explicitly designed to suffocate the weak. With its sound-proofed mahogany walls, dim amber lighting, and the silent, hulking presence of two armed guards stationed at the door, it was a room where negotiations usually ended before they even began. Ha-joon sat at the head of the long table, nursing a glass of neat bourbon. Resting beneath his left hand was a thick manila envelope containing enough cash to buy a civilian's absolute silence for a lifetime. He expected Hana to arrive trembling, her eyes darting nervously around the room, desperate to grab the money and flee back to the safety of her ordinary life. The heavy oak doors swung open. Hana walked in. She wasn't trembling. She wore a simple, tailored charcoal coat over her dark surgical scrubs, the faint scent of sterile antiseptic clinging to her, a stark contrast to the heavy musk and cigar smoke of Ha-joon's underworld. Her dark, intelligent eyes swept over the armed guards with the mild annoyance of someone noting a misplaced chair before locking directly onto the Mafia boss. Her gaze was piercing and completely devoid of fear. Ha-joon gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Sit." Hana remained standing for a long, deliberate second before pulling the chair out herself and taking a seat. She didn't reach for the poured wine in front of her. She just looked at him, waiting for him to justify wasting her time. "You saved one of my employees last night," Ha-joon began, his voice a low, smooth baritone meant to chill the blood. He slid the heavy envelope across the polished wood. It stopped mere inches from her hand. "Consider this a token of my extreme gratitude and a guarantee that you will forget the faces, the tattoos, and the caliber of the bullets you pulled out of his chest." He leaned forward, letting the shadows catch the sharp, predatory angles of his face. "It is in your best interest, doctor, to take the money and enjoy a very quiet, very long life." Hana looked down at the envelope. Then slowly, she placed a single finger on it and pushed it right back across the table. "Keep your money," she said, her voice steady and impossibly calm. "I saved a dying man because I took an oath, not because I care about your gang politics or your hush money. If your employees insist on shooting each other, tell them to aim better, but don't ever threaten me in exchange for doing my job." Ha-joon froze. For the first time in a decade, the calculating crime lord was genuinely caught off guard. The cold detachment he wore like armor, none of it meant a thing against the fierce, unyielding gravity of the woman sitting across from him. She wasn't cowering, she was challenging him. He looked at the untouched envelope, then back to her defiant eyes, feeling a dangerous, unfamiliar spark ignite in his chest. Ha-joon had intended to buy her silence, but as he stared at Hana, he realized he was utterly, helplessly fascinated. Ha-joon was a man accustomed to making the world wait for him. Yet, as he stood across the street from the hospital, wrapped in a dark overcoat against the biting evening chill, he found himself doing exactly the opposite. He watched the sliding glass doors with an uncharacteristic patience, waiting for the woman who had so effortlessly dismissed his authority. When Hana finally emerged, visibly exhausted and clutching a flimsy cup of vending machine coffee, he stepped out of the shadows. No armed guards, no luxury cars, just a man seeking an answer. Hana paused, her dark eyes narrowing as she spotted his silhouette under the flickering glow of a street lamp. "If you're here to slide another envelope of dirty money my way, you're wasting the trip," she stated, her voice slightly hoarse from a grueling 14-hour shift. "No envelopes," Ha-joon replied, his smooth baritone lacking the sharp, predatory edge he had used the night before. "Just a conversation. People in your line of work don't converse. You dictate." Hana took a slow sip of her coffee, completely unfazed by his imposing presence. "Why are you really here?" He closed the distance between them, letting the roar of the Seoul traffic mask the quiet intensity of their exchange. "Because I need to understand you. In my reality, everyone has a price. Everyone reacts to fear or leverage. You operate on neither." Hana let out a brief, bitter laugh. "That is because your reality is built on paranoia and shattered bones. You look at the world and only see threats, assets, or liabilities. I look at people and see lives worth fighting for." "My reality is the truth," Ha-joon countered, his jaw tightening as his deeply ingrained defenses flared to life. "Power is the only concrete foundation you can trust. Without it, you are a victim to those who have it. I control my environment, so it cannot destroy me." "And look exactly what it has cost you," she fired back, stepping fearlessly into his space. She met his cold, calculating stare with a fierce warmth that unsettled him. "You have an entire criminal empire at your feet, yet you're standing on a damp street corner just to find a single person who will look you in the eye without trembling. You aren't powerful. You are completely and utterly alone." The words struck him with the devastating force of a physical blow. Ha-joon opened his mouth to deliver a sharp, cutting reprimand, to remind this civilian exactly who she was speaking to, but the threat died in his throat. She was entirely right. Beneath the vast wealth, the sharp suits, and the terrifying reputation was a suffocating, echoing silence. He had spent his entire adult life building a heavily fortified wall to keep his enemies out, only to realize he had locked himself inside. As Hana turned and walked away into the neon-lit night, leaving him entirely alone on the pavement, the rigid, prejudiced foundation of Ha-joon's world didn't just fracture, it began to shatter. Ha-joon didn't know what drove him back to the hospital, only that his usual sanctuaries, the penthouse, the underground clubs, suddenly felt completely hollow. Bypassing the bustling main entrance, he slipped into the trauma center's observation corridor like a shadow. Through the thick safety glass, he watched the fluorescent-lit chaos of the emergency room unfold. His eyes immediately found Hana. She was a force of nature amidst the panic. The ambulance bay doors blasted open, bringing in a rush of paramedics, shouting vitals and wheeling in stretchers slick with blood. Hana barked orders, her voice slicing through the frantic noise with absolute authority. She moved swiftly from patient to patient, her hands moving with frantic precision as she fought to keep dying men tethered to the living world. Ha-joon watched her apply brutal pressure to a savage, gaping laceration on a young man's neck. The sheer violence of the injury was unmistakable. It wasn't a traffic accident, it was a deliberate message. As a nurse cut away another victim's ruined shirt, Ha-joon saw it, a jagged crimson serpent tattooed across the man's collarbone. It was the mark of the Chung-ryong, a rival faction his own lieutenants had been ordered to clear out of the warehouse district just hours ago. The breath seized in Ha-joon's chest. His cold, calculating mind connected the dots with horrifying clarity. The chaotic influx of bodies, the shattered limbs, the blood soaking through Hana's surgical scrubs, this was his handiwork. He had always viewed violence from the sanitized distance of a boardroom, looking at financial spreadsheets and territorial maps. Casualties were just numbers, a necessary overhead in the brutal business of maintaining dominance. But watching Hana desperately perform chest compressions on a man whose heart was failing because of a hit Ha-joon had personally authorized, his comfortable illusions shattered into dust. She was exhausting her own spirit, draining her energy to painstakingly repair the human bodies his syndicate had deliberately broken. Every drop of blood she fought to keep inside her patients was blood that he had ordered spilled. Ha-joon pressed his hand against the cold glass, an unfamiliar, crushing weight settling violently into his chest. Guilt. For the first time in his life, the undisputed king of Seoul's underworld felt genuinely monstrous. He watched the woman who had captivated his frozen heart desperately fighting against a tide of death, a tide that he commanded. He couldn't look away, forced to agonizingly witness the true cost of his power, measured directly by the deep exhaustion in Hana's eyes. The underground parking garage of Seoul General Hospital was a predictably isolated place for an ambush. Exhausted from a grueling double shift, Hana walked slowly toward her vehicle, the rhythmic click of her shoes echoing against the damp concrete. She didn't notice the three men stepping out from behind a concrete pillar until they had completely boxed her in. Leading them was Tae-suk, a ruthless, ambitious underboss within Ha-joon's own syndicate. He had heard the whispers of his chairman's sudden, uncharacteristic obsession with a civilian doctor and had come to test the waters. "Doctor," Tae-suk sneered, blocking her path with a predatory grin. "We hear you've been occupying our chairman's thoughts. I wanted to see the liability for myself." Hana stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs, refusing to let the panic show on her face. Before she could demand they move, the deafening screech of tires ripped through the cavernous garage. A sleek black sedan violently cut off the exit lane, tires smoking. The door flew open, and Ha-joon stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light. There was no calm calculation in his eyes tonight. The carefully measured restraint he usually wore was completely gone, replaced by a terrifying, lethal fury. The temperature in the garage seemed to plummet as he closed the distance with predatory strides. Tae-suk's smug grin instantly evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine dread as his boss approached. "Chairman?" Tae-suk stammered, bowing sharply, suddenly realizing he had miscalculated. "We were merely—" "Step away from her," Ha-joon commanded. His voice was dangerously soft, yet it resonated like an absolute death sentence. He moved deliberately, stepping directly between Hana and the syndicate members, shielding her entirely with his broad frame. The message was unmistakable. He was placing himself in the line of fire. Ha-joon locked eyes with Tae-suk, the man he had trained to be a merciless killer, and realized exactly what the cost of loving this woman would be. "Listen to me very carefully, Tae-suk," Ha-joon said, his voice carrying the weight of a solemn vow. "She is not a liability. She is mine, and from this second forward, anyone who looks at her, breathes her name, or steps into her shadow answers directly to me." Tae-suk visibly paled, glancing nervously at the other men. "Sir, the council, the families won't accept a civilian dictating your focus. You are declaring war on your own foundation." "Then let it burn to the ground," Ha-joon replied, without a single second of hesitation. He didn't wait for a response. Turning his back on his underworld, Ha-joon reached out and took Hana's hand, his firm, warm grip a stark contrast to the cold violence surrounding them. In that singular, defining moment, Ha-joon didn't just publicly claim the woman he loved, he declared a shadow war against the very empire he had built, ready to tear it down brick by bloody brick to keep her safe. Dismantling a sprawling criminal empire was not a delicate process. It was a deliberate, controlled demolition. Over the next 6 months, Ha-joon systematically severed the heavily fortified arteries of his syndicate. He surrendered the lucrative dockland territories to rival factions without a single retaliatory strike, quietly liquidated his sprawling shadow accounts, and handed over the tightly kept ledgers that tied his most dangerous lieutenants to the blood money. To the ruthless underworld, it looked like sheer, incomprehensible madness. To Ha-joon, it was the necessary ransom for his own soul. The transition was brutally unforgiving. Night after night, Ha-joon survived violent, bloody skirmishes as ambitious underbosses attempted to claim his rapidly vacating throne. His immense, unfathomable wealth evaporated in a matter of weeks, seized by government task forces or surrendered as leverage to buy off his remaining enemies. He permanently traded the sprawling, silent penthouse overlooking Seoul for a modest, unassuming apartment in a quiet, working-class neighborhood. His custom-tailored suits were replaced by plain jackets and denim. The impenetrable king of the underworld was gone, systematically stripped of his crown, his armor, and his absolute power. Yet as he walked through their new front door each evening, bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted, the sight of Hana waiting for him made every agonizing loss feel profoundly insignificant. She patched his wounds with the same steady, unflinching hands that had saved his lieutenant months ago, her quiet strength anchoring him through the darkest days of the purge. They married in the quiet, empty courtyard of a small suburban church. There was no extravagant celebration, no heavily armed security detail pacing the perimeter, and no sprawling network of powerful guests to witness the union. It was just the two of them, standing alone under the pale afternoon sun. Hana looked impossibly radiant, wearing a simple, elegant white dress that caught the gentle autumn breeze. Her dark eyes shone with an unwavering, fierce devotion. She didn't mourn the billions he had willingly burned to ash. She celebrated the man who had successfully walked out of the fire. As Ha-joon slid a plain gold band onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly for the first time in his life, he felt the last remaining shards of his cold, prejudiced past dissolve completely. He had burned his throne, his fortune, and his terrifying legacy to the ground just to stand by her side. But as he pulled his wife into a desperate, grounding kiss, holding the only true treasure he had ever actually wanted, Ha-joon knew he had never been richer. 5 years had passed since the ashes of Ha-joon's criminal empire had completely cooled. The man who once ruthlessly ruled Seoul's dark underbelly from a soundproofed VIP room now sat in a brightly lit, unremarkable office at a mid-sized freight forwarding company. As a senior logistics manager, he spent his days tracking maritime shipping routes and agonizing over supply chain delays. His current manifests didn't contain illicit cargo, unregistered weapons, or blood money. They held standard shipments of commercial electronics, medical supplies, and textiles. Ha-joon reviewed the final spreadsheet of the day, adjusting his reading glasses, and clicked his mouse to log off. The sheer, mundane normalcy of the action felt like a quiet, profound victory. There were no armed guards stationed outside his office door, no rival factions plotting his demise, just the steady hum of the air conditioner and the cheerful chatter of coworkers eagerly heading home to their families. Stepping out of the busy subway station, Ha-joon pulled his tailored wool coat tighter against the brisk autumn wind. He stopped at a neighborhood bakery, picking up 2 fresh pastries before walking the remaining blocks to the comfortable, sunlit townhouse he shared with Hana. The heavy, suffocating paranoia that used to dictate his every waking second had completely vanished. He no longer scanned the shadows for assassins or checked his reflection in storefront windows to see if he was being followed. The agonizing tension that had defined his existence for over 30 decades had been slowly, meticulously erased by the steady, healing rhythm of a peaceful life. He unlocked the front door, the warm, inviting scent of simmering stew and the soft cadence of jazz music immediately washing over him. Hana was in the kitchen, having already traded her surgical scrubs for comfortable loungewear, chopping vegetables with the same precise, capable hands that routinely saved lives in the trauma ward. "You're late," she teased without looking up, a bright, effortless smile touching her lips. "There was a minor cargo delay at the Busan port, purely bureaucratic," Ha-joon replied, shedding his coat and stepping up behind her to press a gentle, lingering kiss to her temple. He placed the bakery box on the counter. "I brought peace offerings." Hana leaned back into his solid embrace, letting out a contented sigh. "I suppose I'll accept them. Rough day?" "No," he murmured, his arms wrapping securely around her waist, anchoring him to the only reality that mattered. As they stood together in the warm, golden glow of their kitchen, the blood-soaked history of the Seoul Mafia felt like a distant, impossible nightmare. They had built a beautiful, unshakable foundation on the ruins of his former life, completely trading power and terror for love and quiet evenings. For the first time, Ha-joon truly believed the dangerous ghosts of his past were finally, permanently buried. The peace was broken not by a scream, but by a single, pristine white envelope resting on the passenger seat of Ha-joon's car. It was sitting there when he returned from a business lunch, a calling card that hadn't existed in his life for years. Ha-joon's blood turned to ice as he opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of the hospital's trauma entrance, taken from a sniper's vantage point. Scrawled across the bottom in familiar, jagged handwriting was a message. "The debt was never settled, Ha-joon. You left the throne, but you forgot to pay the price for leaving. Tae-suk." The name felt like a curse. After 5 years of silence, the vengeful underboss had finally crawled out from the cracks. Ha-joon didn't wait. He dropped the photo and slammed his car into gear, the tires screeching against the asphalt as he tore toward the hospital. He arrived to find the building locked down, but it wasn't a fire drill. The automated doors were jammed, and the air in the lobby was thick with the copper tang of blood and panic. Abandoning his car, Ha-joon bypassed the frantic security personnel and surged through the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time. His lungs burned, a familiar, dark adrenaline flooding his system as he reached the trauma ward. The heavy double doors were chained from the inside. Through the reinforced observation glass, he saw the nightmare. The ward was completely silent, stripped of its usual frantic energy. Hana was standing in the center of the surgical prep area, her hands raised, her white coat stained with crimson. Surrounding her were half a dozen men, their faces obscured by tactical masks. In the center of the circle stood Tae-suk. He looked older, his face scarred, and his eyes burning with the manic, hollow hunger of a man who had nothing left to lose. He was holding a remote detonator, his thumb resting casually over the trigger. "I knew you'd come, Ha-joon," Tae-suk's voice echoing eerily in the sterile hall. He gestured to the rows of surgical beds, where patients were still hooked to life support machines. "She's built a sanctuary of life here. I thought it only fitting to turn it into a tomb. Every door is wired, and the oxygen lines are rigged to blow. If you step through those doors, or if the police try to breach, we all go to hell." Hana caught sight of Ha-joon through the glass. Her face was pale, but her eyes remained steady, focused, and, most terrifyingly, unafraid. Ha-joon reached out to the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The hunter had returned, and he had transformed Hana's sanctuary into the ultimate trap. He had traded his violence for peace, but now the shadows of his past had come to demand the final payment. Ha-joon didn't waste a single second battering against the chained double doors. He knew the structural blueprints of every major civic building in the district, a necessary remnant of his tactical past. Slipping away from the observation glass, he bypassed the frantic emergency responders and navigated to a restricted maintenance corridor. With a brutal, precise kick, he shattered the drywall concealing a defunct ventilation shaft that bypassed the ward's main security seals. As he pulled himself into the dark, suffocating space, the mild-mannered logistics manager died in the dust. The ghost of Seoul, the cold, calculating apex predator of the underworld, was resurrected. Dropping silently from a ceiling grate into the sterile supply closet of the trauma ward, Ha-joon brushed the dust from his shoulders. He didn't carry a weapon. His greatest weapon had always been his terrifying, absolute authority. He pushed the closet door open and walked deliberately onto the main surgical floor. His footsteps echoed against the pristine white tiles, steady and completely unhurried. One of the masked mercenaries spun around, raising his assault rifle, but instantly froze. Even beneath the mask, Ha-joon could see the man's eyes widen in primal terror as he recognized the legendary chairman. The sheer, suffocating force of Ha-joon's aura caused the mercenary to instinctively lower his barrel. Tae-suk whipped his head around, his manic grin faltering as Ha-joon stepped directly into the harsh fluorescent light, stopping merely 10 feet from the explosives. "I told you the doors were wired," Tae-suk barked, his thumb trembling over the remote detonator as he frantically backed up. "I didn't use the doors," Ha-joon replied, his smooth, icy baritone that instantly dropped the temperature of the room. He briefly locked eyes with Hana. Despite the armed men and the looming threat of death, she didn't flinch. Her fierce, unwavering gaze grounded him, anchoring his rage. He gave her a microscopic nod before shifting his dead, terrifying stare back to his former underboss. "You were always unimaginative, Tae-suk. You bring guns and explosives into a hospital, thinking loud noise equals power. But true power is silent." Tae-suk sneered, though a bead of sweat rolled down his scarred cheek. "You have no power here, old man. You gave it all up for a civilian. I hold the trigger. I hold her life. Beg for it, and maybe I'll let the rest of these patients live." Ha-joon didn't blink. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuttoned his suit jacket and spread his empty hands, a calculated gesture of utter, terrifying dominance. "You are standing in my city, breathing my air and threatening my wife," Ha-joon said softly, stepping closer. "You don't want me to beg, Tae-suk. You came here because you wanted to see the monster you remember. Well, look at me. Here I am." The silence in the trauma ward was deafening. Every instinct Ha-joon had honed in the brutal underworld screamed at him to close the distance, snap Tae-suk's wrist, and end the threat with violent, lethal efficiency. The ghost of his past clawed at his mind, demanding blood. But then he looked at Hana. Even now, standing in the center of a wired trap, her eyes held no judgment, only an unshakable faith in the man he had become. She hadn't married a monster. She had married a protector. Ha-joon exhaled slowly, letting the murderous rage dissipate into the sterile air. He wasn't going to taint his wife's sanctuary with blood. Without breaking eye contact, Ha-joon reached slowly into the inner pocket of his jacket. Tae-suk's mercenaries instantly tensed, but Ha-joon merely withdrew a sleek smartphone. He tapped the screen once and tossed it across the floor. It slid to a halt directly at Tae-suk's boots. "Check your offshore accounts, Tae-suk," he commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "The Cayman routing numbers, the shell corporations in Macau, all of it." Tae-suk frowned, his thumb still hovering over the detonator, but he cautiously glanced down at the glowing screen, his face drained of all color. "Did you honestly believe I dismantled an empire without keeping the blueprints? 10 minutes ago, a digital dead man's switch was triggered. Every single account funding your little rebellion has been frozen and legally transferred to a federal task force. The local police captain you bribed, currently in federal custody." Ha-joon shifted his gaze to the heavily armed mercenaries. You are currently working for a man who has zero capital and an active federal warrant. If you stay, you will be prosecuted under anti-terrorism laws. If you walk out of that fire exit right now, I will unlock a shadow account that pays each of you triple your current contract. Your choice. The mercenaries exchanged uncertain glances. The legendary ghost of Seoul wasn't bluffing. He never bluffed. One by one, they lowered their rifles. In less than 30 seconds, they had quietly filed out through the emergency exit, leaving Tae-suk completely alone. Tae-suk's hand shook as he gripped the detonator. He had come to orchestrate a grand, violent execution, only to find himself utterly bankrupted and outmaneuvered without a single shot being fired. The legal traps Ha-joon had quietly laid over the past 5 years had sprung flawlessly. Press it and you die in the blast of a ruined man. Drop it and federal prosecutors will let you rot in solitary confinement for the rest of your miserable life. Leaving Tae-suk completely paralyzed by the utter destruction of his future, Ha-joon walked directly to Hana. He gently took her hand, his touch warm and grounding, and led her out of the trauma ward. They left the shadows behind them, walking cleanly into the light of the life they had fought so hard to build.
And that brings us to the end of Ha-joon and Hana's incredible journey, a testament to the fact that true power isn't found in ruling an empire, but in the lengths a person will go to protect the one they love. Thank you so much for tuning in to this epic story. If you were captivated by this tale of romance, redemption, and suspense, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. We would love to know our audience better. Please drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep watching.